For today's project, I want to talk about the design process and how I apply that to the things that I build. Today I'm going to be building a glass sculpture for my wife that resembles a flame. It has flowers encapsulated in it, and it's a vision that I had a while ago, and I want to try to make that. Now, when I started, I had no idea of what medium I was going to use, and that's one of the things I want to talk about, is the fact that we could use any medium to make just about anything. I don't want to limit myself to 3D printing or to wood or to resin or to glass or anything. I want to try to think of the things that'll apply to the best of what I'm trying to make. I like to think outside the box, go to the dollar store, get inspired by various shapes that you find, things that are inexpensive, and make those into something that you can call your own. The material selection for today will include clay and polymer clay not shown here, black resin, silicone for casting, clear resin, reclaimed walnut, a wide range of sandpaper from 100 to 3000 grit, polishing compounds, and applicator sponges for polishing. I've tried various ways of making this flame that's in my head, and I want to get it in my hands. I've tried with computers, with Blender or Fusion. I've tried even inside of the Oculus, has a VR sculpting software that I was trying to use. I believe it's called Medium, and I still couldn't get that flame. There's a tangibility that I like to have when I'm doing my design. That works for me. It doesn't mean it works for everybody. You see here, I'm trying to 3D print the one I made in Blender, and it didn't quite work out, but it was a try. The other thing that I was working on was starting with some tin foil and creating a base and then wrapping it with monster clay. Monster clay is an oil-based clay that never hardens, and it's very good for making molds out of. I tried both of these and it didn't give me quite what I was looking for. So then I started to work with clay. Believe it or not, it's one of the cheaper products that you can use. It's $1 a pound, and I was able to create what I wanted quite easily. Clay has a very interesting malleability, where the drier it gets, the harder it gets. And if you add water, it becomes soft again. So I'm able to mold it when it's liquidy, and I'm able to scrape it when it's dry. And then I can achieve a very glass-like finish. Now that our clay sculpture is complete, we're going to make a mold. Since we want this final product to be clear, we're going to use a clear resin. To get clear resin in that shape, we need to make a mold, but you need to create a box to hold the silicone. Silicone doesn't stick to anything but itself, so you don't need to use a release agent. You can use just about anything to make a box. I'm using foam core here. I'm measuring the base, measuring the sides, cutting 4mm slots, and folding them in place. This creates a liquid-tight seal, so the silicone doesn't leak out. You could use hot glue alone without these nested edges, but I find this more accurate and sturdy. Silicone's an interesting material. You can take old molds, like this Batman mold that I made a while ago for a friend. The pieces that I'm cutting up will actually take up area for the material, so I don't have to use as much liquid silicone to fill the space. As long as I get liquid silicone between the model and the solid silicone, it should pretty much be seamless. This will also save in the cost. Many of the materials that we use are mixed by either weight or by volume. I would always recommend doing weight and using grams so you can get it as accurate as possible. This is a 10:1 ratio, so I zero out my scale, pour the white silicone in, divide it by 10, and then add the hardener. This has to be mixed very thoroughly. When you mix it, you're introducing bubbles. It's recommended that you degas silicone, but it's not necessary. If you pour it from very high and make a very thin spaghetti-like stream, it'll get most of the bubbles out. Since I have a degassing chamber available to me, I'm going to use that here. Silicone will only adhere to itself and nothing else, so it is an excellent mold making product. I noticed that the sides are bowing out a little bit from the amount of mass that's in here. This thing weighs about 6 pounds. So I'm going to put a clamp and some pieces of wood on the side to keep the sides from bowing, and allow this to dry as straight as possible. Now we just have to sit and wait for 24 hours. My wife adored flowers, and pink calla lilies were her favorites by far. I figured teaching the kids to sculpt would be a fun and educational project. I'm going to try from memory and create an example of what I believe the flower shape will be. I'm also showing the kids in the concept of how I believe that these can be made. This is a polymer clay that can be purchased at any craft store. It comes in a variety of colors and you can buy very little pieces if you want. It can be baked inside of a standard oven. Each of us will make a few of these to find the best ones. We're going to bake the stems so that they are firm and don't get deformed when we try to mold the flower. I clipped a flower from our garden to get a real-world concept of the shape of the flower. I'll draw a smaller version and that will be our template. I'm mixing the color of white with red to get a pink marble pattern that you can see here. We will roll the shape of the flower around the cooled stem. Now we're bending it out to actually make it look like a calla lily. I purchased reclaimed walnut a long time ago, and I've been holding that for a special project like this. I'm just going to cut this in circles and we're going to turn it on the lathe. It's not as thick as I want, so I'm going to glue 2 of them together. I'm using a drill bit to center this to make sure that they align properly, because when I put this on a lathe, I want it to be as balanced as possible. We're going to clamp this up and let it sit for several hours. This material is almost exactly the width that I need. I need to make sure that the center is perfectly aligned. Since things will be flying at your face at a high rate of speed, it's recommended that you wear a dust mask and a face shield. After turning, we're going to create a lip on the bottom. We're going to apply various sandpapers going from 500 to 1000. Adding stain to this makes a world of difference. Well, it's been 24 hours and our mold is complete. We have to cut this thing out. I could have made a 2-part mold, but that creates a very obvious seam. I don't plan on making a whole bunch of these, really just the one. So cutting this out with a knife is fine if you're only going to make it once. The seams for this should be minimal by doing it this way, but it's not as repeatable as it could be. The closest thing I could find to represent glass is crystal clear from Smooth On. Most resins are not this complicated, but I'd like to at least step through the process I had to go through. I had to preheat the mold to prepare it for the resin. Since there are toxic fumes, I had to use a respirator, had open ventilation, and a face mask. Crystal clear needs to be degassed in a vacuum chamber. Once the resin is clear of bubbles and smooth, I'll pour it into the mold. I'm hoping to remove bubbles from the flowers by pouring this in and breaking the surface tension. The flowers are held on with zip ties that I'm taping to the top of the mold. Unlike any other resin that I've used, this has to sit inside of pressure at 60 pounds for 18 hours. This was not easy to get out of the mold by any means. It took a lot of pulling and 2 additional hands. Here it is out of the mold. No polish, it's exactly as it came out. With some sanding and polishing, I think we can get this pretty nice. The basics of sanding are just removing scratches from the previous grit. That could not be more prevalent than polishing something that is clear. If you're not thorough, you may need to start over. Well, this is where you see we have this section about complete. I will still be polishing for hours, but you can see where this is going. This is the first of 2 parts for this very special piece. Please join me to see the rest being made here or on my channel. Thank you so much.